Hello, and welcome back to Angelica's Morbid Minutes. I'm Angelica, your voice slipping through corridors when prayer met punishment and mercy wore a uniform. Trigger warning: this episode contains accounts of religious abuse, forced labor, and neglect of women and children. Ireland, 1922. A new nation found its breath beneath the ashes of empire. Faith and freedom were twinned like ivy over runes. Both were meant to protect the soul of the people. But behind church walls and beneath stained glass, a different kind of nation building was taking place. One that measured virtue by obedience and sin by womanhood. The first Magdalene Laundries had opened decades earlier under the banner of charity. By the 20th century, they were a chain of asylums operated by Catholic orders across Ireland, places for fallen women. The phrase itself was elastic, stretching to fit unwed mothers, orphans, girls who talked back, victims of assault, and anyone whose existence made men uncomfortable. Families signed their daughters over for discipline. Priests signed papers for salvation. What waited inside was neither. The laundry in Dublin sat behind high grey walls, its iron gates chained like prayers gone wrong. Steam rose from vent pipes and blew across the courtyard, smelling of bleach and sweat. Inside, rows of women scrubbed linen until their hands bled. They wore cotton smocks, shaved heads hidden under handkerchiefs. Their names were replaced with numbers. Silence here was not a rule. It was a language. Morning bells split the air at 5. Work followed mass. Meals were brief, prayers long, sleep short. The women washed linens for hospitals, military barracks, and hotels. The public soothed by the illusion of holy industry. Each day they lifted other people's stains and watched their own lives bleach away. Officially, no one was there by force. In practice, no one was allowed to leave. Families that had committed them rarely visited, and the church did not forgive without permission from men. Women were told their sins had placed them in God's care. When they cried, they were told to thank Him for His mercy. In Galway, a girl named Bridget entered the laundry in 1956 after her father died. She was 15. The nuns took her school uniform and burned it, saying it carried worldly temptation. They gave her a number, 72, and a bucket. For the next 3 years, she scrubbed until her knuckles cracked and healed crooked. Once, she asked if she could write to her brother. The Mother Superior handed her a blank sheet of paper and said, "God hears letters better than the postman." Bridget escaped in 1959 by climbing the delivery gate during a storm. She walked to Galway Bay, barefoot and bleeding. Fishermen found her and brought her to the police. The next day, officers returned her to the laundry. They called it a home. The records list her as readmitted for her own safety. She was 16. Across Ireland, laundries multiplied. Dublin, Cork, Waterford, Limerick. Each city had its own factory of forgiveness. At their peak in the 1940s and 50s, these institutions held up to 1,000 women each. They earned profits for the church and contracts from the state. The women earned nothing but calluses. The nuns believed they were saving souls through suffering. Pain was purification. Blood was penance. Even the laundry's name, Magdalene, was a warning. A woman who repented by washing the feet of Christ. Here, the message twisted. Washing wasn't symbol. It was sentence. Sometimes, new girls arrived pregnant. They were sent to adjacent maternity homes run by the same orders. After birth, the babies were taken. Many adopted abroad, some unaccounted for. The mothers were returned to the laundry floor within days, told to pray for their child's soul and their own. There was no contact, no closure, just the sound of metal baskets rolling over tiles and the smell of soap that never quite washed off. By the 1970s, modern feminism had begun to breach Ireland's walls. Students protested, journalists asked questions, but the church's grip was centuries deep. Politicians looked away. It was easier to let the nuns handle the problem girls. Families still believed it was better for a daughter to disappear behind those walls than to appear in public disgrace. The irony is that the Magdalene Laundries survived longer than most people realize. The last closed in 1996, when Ireland had the internet, when boy bands filled stadiums, when you could rent a VHS of Jurassic Park. While the world moved forward, inside those walls, women were still wringing out the 20th century with bare hands. One former inmate said, "I scrubbed my way through decades and came out the same age as the country." Another said she still dreamed of soap bubbles that whispered her number. The silence finally cracked in 1993. That spring, construction crews in Dublin uncovered a mass grave on the grounds of a former laundry run by the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity. It wasn't marked as a cemetery, just a patch of land with tangled weeds and rusted crosses. Beneath it lay the remains of 155 women. Death records listed them as inmates. Some were as young as 15. Others were simply labeled unknown. Ireland couldn't look away anymore. Newspapers filled with photographs of rosaries draped over bones, headlines asking how Sanctity had turned industrial. Ireland's Prime Minister called for calm, but the questions kept coming. Who were they? Why were they buried here? And why hadn't their families been told? For survivors, the discovery tore open what little healing they'd managed. One woman, Mary Marriott, told reporters, "I always knew there were ghosts under those floors. Now everyone else does too." Her words ran above the fold the next morning. The church offered statements about compassion, about context. Compassion doesn't explain bones, and context doesn't excuse unmarked graves. Journalists began tracing paper trails, employment contracts, state payments, adoption ledgers. Each file revealed the same quiet partnership. The Irish government had funded the laundries, sending work orders for linens and uniforms, paying invoices stamped with crucifixes. State oversight, they called it. What it really was complicity. In 1996, Ireland finally shuttered the last remaining laundry in Waterford. But closing doors doesn't end history. Former residents began to speak publicly, organizing under survivor networks like Magdalene Justice. They wrote letters to Parliament, appeared on talk shows, and held photos of the dead outside government buildings. Their message was simple: we were not sinners, we were citizens. The state stalled. The church denied direct abuse, calling it a misunderstanding of convent discipline. It took another decade before an official inquiry began. The 2009 Ryan Report cataloged sexual and physical abuse across Irish institutions, industrial schools, mother and baby homes, and laundries, but it barely scratched the surface. When asked why so many women had been imprisoned without trial, one former minister shrugged and said, "It was the time we lived in." But time isn't a defense. It's a witness, and witnesses don't forget. Survivors described days measured by bells. The sound, one said, wasn't holy, it was hunger. They spoke of forced labor, of funerals held without names, of punishment cells where the only light came from cracks between bricks. These were not metaphors. They were blueprints of cruelty drawn in routine. By 2011, international outrage forced the government to confront what it had ignored. Prime Minister Edna Kenny met with survivors in private sessions. Many refused to enter government buildings without their lawyers. They'd spent too many years being told to obey. Kenny listened for hours, and when he stood before Parliament on February 19, 2013, he wept. His voice broke as he said, "This is a national shame, for which I, on behalf of the state, deeply and sincerely apologize." For the first time in 80 years, the Irish state admitted guilt. Not sin, but complicity. Crowds gathered outside Leinster House to watch the speech on big screens. Survivors held candles even in daylight. When the Prime Minister's words reached the final sentence, they began to chant, "Justice, justice." Some cried, some couldn't. Decades of silence do strange things to tears. Financial compensation followed. A €58 million redress scheme. It paid for therapy, for housing, for survival. But no amount of money could refund youth. Most survivors were in their 70s. Many died before their checks arrived. What they wanted most wasn't cash. It was acknowledgement that what happened inside those walls wasn't divine. It was deliberate. The nuns' orders issued statements of regret. Regret is the politest word for guilt when lawyers are listening. They never used the word apology. They never said forgiveness as if it belonged to the women instead of the church. They offered prayers instead of explanations. For Ireland, this reckoning was more than moral. It was existential. The nation had built its identity on purity, modesty, and faith. The laundries exposed the cost of that image. The same country that sent poets into exile and saints into myth had also locked thousands of its daughters behind bolted gates and called it virtue. When the apology aired on national television, viewers across Ireland turned down the volume halfway through. Some couldn't bear it. Others simply didn't know what to feel. The church had baptized generations, married their partners, buried their grandparents. To accept its guilt felt like tearing a page from the national prayer book. But the truth doesn't ask permission. It just waits. The apology echoed, but echoes don't heal. They just remind. For survivors, the real work began after the cameras turned away. Many had no homes, no pensions, no family left alive. Years inside had stolen education and identity, so they built community from scratch. Cafes that doubled as support centers, sewing groups that became therapy circles, phone chains that checked on each other every morning. They refused to let history be tidy. "We're not statistics," one woman said. "We're proof." Documentaries followed. The Forgotten Magdalenes, Sex in a Cold Climate, The Women Who Told. Viewers watched in stunned quiet as former nuns and inmates sat across from each other, separated by time and disbelief. When one nun said, "We loved them as daughters," the camera cut to a woman whose hands still bore pale scars from scalding water. She didn't speak. She just looked straight at the lens, letting silence do the arithmetic. Irish classrooms began to include the laundries in history lessons. Teachers struggled with tone, how to balance faith with fact. Some invited survivors to speak. Others showed clips of the state apology. For the first time, teenagers heard the phrase, "fallen women," not as morality, but as indictment. In essays they wrote, "We didn't fall. We were pushed." Museums created small exhibits, photographs of iron presses, rosaries blackened by steam, letters never mailed. A few laundries reopened as memorial spaces. Visitors walked through, stripped dormitories, paint flaking, floors hollow with echo. One tour guide pointed to a wall where faint writing read, "Deirdre was here, 1968. The chalk had survived 40 years of scrubbing. Some things refuse to be erased. Culturally, Ireland began to question its romance with guilt. Novels, plays, and songs turned the laundries into metaphors for repression itself. Sinead O'Connor sang about stolen daughters. Poets wrote of soap and sorrow. The nation that had once whispered now argued loudly. On radio shows, in pubs, in Parliament, the church's shadow still stretched long, but daylight was coming through the cracks. Still, not everyone wanted that light. In 2017, when activists proposed converting one Dublin laundry into a national memorial, property developers objected. They wanted apartments. The government hesitated. Survivors protested, chaining themselves to the gates one last time. Not in captivity, but in defiance. "We built this with our hands," one said. "You don't get to sell our ghosts." After weeks of public outcry, the sale was halted. The site became a museum instead. Inside that museum stands a single laundry press, its handle polished smooth by decades of labor. Visitors can touch it, though most don't. The metal radiates a strange heat, like something that still remembers being held too tightly. In 2020, new forensic studies re-examined records of children born in affiliated mother and baby homes. Most graves were found. Tuam, Bessaburo, Sean Ross. The headlines blurred together until they read like a refrain. More bodies found. Each discovery re-widened the wound. Survivors said it felt like exhuming memory itself. Necessary, but never gentle. Ireland's younger generations responded differently. They organized online vigils, digital archives, hashtag campaigns demanding full church transparency. Where their grandparents crossed themselves, they posted links. Where silence once ruled, there was algorithmic noise, and for once, that noise served the truth. The Catholic orders still hold most of the archives. Historians petition yearly for access. Many files remain sealed for privacy. Privacy in this context means protection from accountability. But history has a habit of leaking through paperwork and red tape. Every new letter found in an attic, every baptism record misfiled, pulls another thread. The tapestry is unraveling in full view now. Even the Vatican, under mounting pressure, issued a statement in 2021 acknowledging the sorrow and the wounds inflicted upon innocents. But sorrow isn't justice, and wounds don't close with words. Ireland's new generations want more than mourning. They want evidence, education, and reform. In Galway, there's a mural of a woman hanging linens in an endless wind. Her face is half erased, eyes turned skyward. Beneath her, painted in white script, are the words, "We washed away your shame and wore it like skin." Tourists stop to photograph it. Locals leave flowers. The city council once tried to paint it over, calling it too confrontational. Overnight, someone redrew it. Larger, brighter, unignorable. That's the legacy of the Magdalene Laundries, endurance disguised as humility. The women were taught to bow their heads. The country finally learned to lift its own. One survivor, now in her 80s, summed it up best on national radio. "We forgave God a long time ago. We're still waiting for Ireland." The interviewer asked what she wanted most. She said, "To be believed without having to bleed." And that's the line that divides history from healing. Belief without suffering, recognition without proof of pain. When a nation can do that, maybe sanctity will finally mean something holy again. When you stand outside one of the old laundry gates today, you can still smell soap if it rains. The stone walls sweat history. Lime, lie, salt, and sorrow all pressed together. Tour guides speak softly out of habit, as if loud voices might wake something that finally sleeps. Inside, everything looks smaller than the stories made it seem. Narrow beds, bent rosaries, a single stained-glassed window where the light refuses to fall straight. Visitors whisper things like unbelievable and horrific, but those words are too easy. Belief isn't the hard part, it's acceptance. It's accepting that holiness and harm can coexist behind the same locked door. Every country has places like this, where morality becomes machinery. Ireland's sin was industrial scale and polite denial. The laundries functioned because ordinary people let them. Shopkeepers delivered soap. Tailors repaired uniforms. Priests collected payment. Everyone touched the system and called it service. That's the uncomfortable truth about collective guilt. It rarely feels personal until it's printed in the obituary of your silence. When the government published the full Magdalene report in 2014, the last page carried a list of names. Thousands. No titles, no ranks, just names. Reading them felt like walking a corridor of echoes. So many began with Mary. So many ended with nothing at all. Some lines stopped halfway across the page, as if the ink had given up. One entry simply read, "Unknown, age approximately 40, buried 1963." And underneath, a note from the archivist, "Hands badly scarred, cause of death, exhaustion." No one writes poetry like that on purpose. For years, Ireland kept trying to turn away from its ghosts with the excuse that it was a different time. But time isn't a shield, it's a mirror. The faces change, but reflection remains, and every nation, sooner or later, has to decide whether it will keep polishing that mirror or finally look into it. The Magdalene Laundries aren't ancient history. They're living residue. The last survivors still sit for interviews, their voices cracking, not from age, but from overuse, telling the story over and over again, because repetition is the only way to make people believe a horror so ordinary. One woman, Kathleen, spoke at a university panel last year. Someone asked what forgiveness looked like to her. She said, "It looks like a future where no one has to ask me that question again." That's the ache of survival, having to prove you survived. Outside, younger generations leave offerings, not prayers, but notes folded into laundry tags, messages written in pen and pencil. "I believe you. I'm angry for you. I'm sorry we inherited this silence." The wind picks them up, scatters them through the courtyard, and sometimes they catch in the hedges like white flags. There's power in that imagery. A surrender, not to shame, but to truth. The state now funds counseling for survivors and education programs for students, yet the gap between apology and amends remain wide. Justice delayed doesn't always arrive. Sometimes it just ages. But it's still, the act of naming what happened out loud without euphemism is its own quiet revolution. Ireland's relationship with the church has changed irrevocably. Attendance dropped, priests dwindled, parishes merged. Some called it decline. Others called it reckoning. Faith is still here, but it wears different clothes now. Less lace, more honesty. The idea of holiness survived. The illusion of infallibility did not. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe holiness was never about obedience, but about accountability. The courage to admit when good people build bad systems. The women of the laundries were never canonized, but they performed miracles of endurance. They turned suffering into testimony, and testimony into reform. They carried Ireland into the century it had tried to keep from them. Every policy rewritten, every classroom that says their names, every mural that refuses to fade. That's resurrection enough. I think about Bridget sometimes, the girl from Galway who tried to run during a storm. I imagine her older now, standing on the western coast, watching the Atlantic churn. I imagine her hands still scarred, her eyes fierce, the salt wind mixing with the salt of memory. Maybe she still dreams of the gate, but now she walks through it on her own terms. Because survival isn't the end of the story, it's the sequel we owe them. And speaking of sequels, some hauntings refuse to stay across the sea. Here in Maine, where mist wraps around pine and prayer alike, another story waits. One about faith twisted into tragedy, about a mother whose mind broke beneath the weight of guilt, and a town that still whispers her name when the wind shifts over the river. Next time, we return home to the hinterlands, to a house too quiet and a mother too calm. Until then, remember, holiness isn't measured by silence, but by how loudly we protect the living.